Moving on to AFC North post-draft, the Ravens, the Bengals, the Browns, the Steelers. How did these teams' draft classes look in 2023 and beyond right now?
NFL analyst Brian Peacock and former NFL scout Matt Williamson bring you expert NFL analysis every day in less than 30 minutes. Get an inside look into the NFL on the field and in the front office. With elite breakdowns, next-level analysis, and in-depth information only for the real NFL fans. This is Peacock and Williamson, and it starts now.
Welcome to the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show. Brian Peacock and Matt Williamson with you, as always, at BD Peacock, at Williamson NFL. Thanks, everybody, for making us your first listen right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. BetterHelp connects you with a licensed therapist who can take you on that journey of self-discovery from wherever you are. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOn today to get 10% off your first month. All right, this is a division you know very well, Matt.
Yeah.
Steelers daily in the Pittsburgh area. We'll get to them last. We're going alphabetical here, starting with the Baltimore Ravens. But first, a little look at the salary cap situation for these teams, because it's all tied in. You got offseason maneuvers, you've got draft, you've got salary cap for now and later, and how teams are built now affects future years. How teams past were built affects this year. And obviously with the Baltimore Ravens too, like the biggest thing that happened for them on draft weekend wasn't even their draft haul. It was re-signing their star quarterback, Lamar Jackson.
Absolutely. So just a minute or two here on where these teams are financially. Right now in 2013, they're all about the same. Cincinnati's got over 16 million. The Ravens have over 13, and the Steelers and Browns are right around 7. So they're all fine. They're not in bad shape. They don't have an inordinate amount. But why I wanted to bring it up, though, is next year, the Steelers and Ravens are middle of the pack, if not better. They have some spending power for next year. However, the Bengals have 82 million in cap space. Well, where do you think that's going? They've got some big fish to fry, of course, where the other team in Ohio is the total opposite. They're minus 51 million for next year. Only the Saints and Chargers are worse. So it's all about the quarterbacks. One's got to pay the quarterback. One already did. I think Watson's like a $70 million cap hit next year. So where I'm going with this is, I feel like the Browns' window's closing pretty rapidly here, and they didn't have a first-round pick. I don't think they have next year's first-round pick. So they're going to start losing the Amari Coopers and Jack Conklins of the world, as opposed to being buyers.
That's fascinating. And we're going to start seeing it with the Baltimore Ravens. Obviously, you have an expensive quarterback, the Cincinnati Bengals as well. So 3 out of 4 teams with either right now or very soon, very, very highly paid quarterbacks. While the Steelers are over there with a rookie wage scale quarterback. It was a first-round rookie, but mid-first round, that's a bargain if he's good. But is he good? And so fascinating division from that standpoint. And as we've seen with the Kansas City Chiefs, and I think we might kind of put a button in the Cincinnati Bengals and the Browns real quick. We're seeing what the Baltimore Ravens are doing right now. First-round wide receiver, right? Because it's not a position they're going to be able to pay long-term in free agency. They've got a short-term guy in Odell Beckham, but they really need those draft picks. Zay Flowers, their first-round draft pick in 2023, number 22 overall in the first round this year out of Boston College, and the guy they drafted a couple of years ago as well. They're going to need those guys to perform, because they're not going to be able to pay a ton of guys on offense and probably pass catchers in the long term with with the new deal that Lamar Jackson is on. Right.
100%. Yeah. So they're for a long stretch, the Steelers had Ben, and they were the one paying them, and everyone else was looking for a quarterback. Now the tides have turned a little bit. So really interesting quarterback division.
Where did you see Zay Flowers in the whole grand scheme of receivers? Because according to most anonymous scouts, it was kind of like Jackson Smith and Jigba and maybe a gap. But when the draft came and went, it was actually Jackson Smith and Jigba at 20, then 21, 22, 23, all wide receivers. And Zay Flowers was one of those guys.
I love him. I thought he was the second best receiver, in a nutshell. I think I like the fit in terms of I always, when you think of Ravens receivers, I immediately think big bodies, blockers. Marquise Brown didn't really fit in, but that's kind of an antiquated way of looking at it. I mean, he's a physical guy. He can play the slot. He can play outside. It's pretty clear after adding Odell and Flowers and hopefully getting Bateman back healthy, that they want to throw the ball to receivers. They want to attack the outside. They're going to play more 11 personnel, less tight end usage. So I think it's a real nice pickup for the Ravens for sure.
Before we talk about the rest of the draft class and it's our favorites and least favorite picks here for all these teams. So Lamar Jackson, he's the quarterback now. No more weirdness. He's been extended. He's the guy. Then you look at Mark Andrews, one of the top pass catching tight ends in the NFL. Nice rapport there with Lamar, so that's good. And then you look at the receivers. Zay Flowers added to Rashawn Bateman, who I mentioned, big key in his development going forward. Odell Beckham, the short-term stopgap wide receiver there. You still got Devin Duvernay, Nelson Aguilar, who they brought in, James Prochet, a later round pick a couple of years ago, and some other guys battling for some of those back of the roster spots at wide receiver. How do you rank this passing game now, just looking at Lamar and his weapons?
A big trend with this team is durability, though. I mean, they have dealt with so many injuries, and Bateman can't stay on the field. Odell can't stay on the field. So the receiver room kind of epitomizes that. But I think it went from maybe the worst group of wide receivers in the league last year, to league average. I'll go there, which is a huge jump.
Right, because Rashad Bateman's hurt. You don't have Odell yet. You don't have Zay Flowers yet.
Right.
And basically, it's Mark Andrews and last year's rookie tight end who looked awesome in the fourth round, Isaiah Likely. I didn't need to mention him or leave him out of the conversation. So you had like Prochet and Duvernay starting at wide receiver. It was not a great situation for the Baltimore Ravens. It looks much better, and now a new offensive coordinator. So now we get to sit back and watch and see how this takes shape with the passing game.
Yeah, I'm intrigued. I think not that what they did, well, maybe it did. The style of play that they installed when Lamar took over, I thought was starting to run its course, and Harbaugh recognized it. The more teams played against that offense, and not necessarily just Lamar, but that style of offense, the more success they had. The Ravens started having less and less success in the division. They were beating NFC teams that only saw it once every 4 years regularly. But then when teams started to understand what they were doing, I think it started to run its course a little bit, and they realized, they never throw the ball to running backs, and they never throw the ball to wide receivers compared to other teams. You got to do those things in the league.
I have a feeling you'll see a lot more of that coming up in 2023 with that Ravens offense. Okay, beyond round one, with all the trades too, a record number of trades in this draft, the Baltimore Ravens kind of stood pat. First round at their spot, Zay Flowers. Second round came back with Trenton Simpson, Clemson linebacker. Tavius Robinson, Ole Miss outside linebacker in the fourth round. Round 5, Caillou Blue Kelly, Stanford corner. And then Mausala Amove Lalu. Nice. I believe I got it close. Oregon offensive tackle in round 6. Then Andrew Voorhees, an interesting one, kind of an injury redshirt guy who was hurt during the I think he was hurt at the combine and then still threw up those 38 reps at the bench press, which was the tops of the entire combine this year. So you got to love that, fighting through it. And he knew he was going to put up a big number. He's like, dude, I came for this. I don't care if I don't have a ligament in my knee. I am going to push up this weight and show everybody what I can do. So interesting pick for later with Voorhees, who's probably going to be a guard in the NFL out of USC in round 7. Like that pick. Might be my favorite pick, actually.
I think that's my favorite pick because I don't love this draft, and there's not that many picks. Usually, in the past years, the Ravens have made 11 picks, 8 picks, 10 picks, 8 picks, 12 picks. This year, after the Roquan trade and lack of comp picks, they only made 6 selections. And I think Voorhees is my favorite because I think he projects to a starting guard a year from now. In between Flowers and Voorhees is a little lackluster to me.
I did leave out that second round pick that they were missing because of the deadline trade for Roquan Smith last year. So it was Trenton Simpson in the third round after a gap in round 2 there. And I like the Simpson value, I think, in late in round 3 there. Linebacker out of Clemson, has a lot of physical gifts.
Yeah, and we mentioned in a previous show, they're not going to pick up the 5th-year option on Patrick Queen. So there's an obvious path there. I think Simpson could use a little bit of time. Tremendous athlete. Developing football player, sometimes he takes false steps and kind of goes kind of like chicken with his head cut off, but a year sitting there might do him a lot of good. So BP, an article I wrote for DK Pittsburgh Sports. I write one article a week, and it'll be up tomorrow. Is I compared every position group in the AFC North, and obviously it's through a Steeler lens. How do they stack up? And when you put pen to paper, the Baltimore defensive front, D tackle and edge, is really worrisome to me. I didn't think it was. I mean, it was worse than I had kind of imagined. They need guys like Owe and Ajabo to really, really step up. And I don't know that, Tavius Robinson is the answer.
Tavius Robinson is a nice player, but I think it's all about Ajabo because Owe, if he was going to be a guy, I think we would have seen more from him. And Ajabo was, we talked about Voorhees being a redshirt guy. He was the redshirt guy last year, and tons of talent out of Michigan. Edge guy. Is that an extra, first or second round pick? They didn't have their second round pick this year. Is he going to give them that value that he didn't as a rookie because he was injured? David Ajabo is probably one of the biggest keys to that front because, like you mentioned, Owe, Ajabo, Michael Pierce, Broderick Washington, Travis. Actually, you know what? Their whole day two next from the 2022 draft is probably the key to their season. I mean, maybe that's overstating it, but I really liked Travis Jones, who they ended up with in the third round in last year's draft. He was injured a little bit as a rookie, just a powerful defensive tackle. So Travis Jones and David Ajabo from the 2022 draft might be as important as any player they drafted in 2023 to their season this year.
Yeah, 100%, because they didn't do much in free agency, and then they, got the Lamar Odell stuff done late and really obviously addressed the passing game, but didn't do a lot to help their defensive line.
All right, let's move it along. Next, we've got the Cincinnati Bengals, the Cleveland Browns, and Matt's Pittsburgh Steelers, some of our favorite picks from the division and how these teams are shaping up in 2023 post-draft next. Today's episode of Peacock and Williamson is brought to you by BetterHelp Online Therapy. It's so easy to get caught up in what everyone else needs from you in your daily life and never really take that moment to think about what you need from yourself. How much time do you spend on yourself every week versus how much time you spend doing everything else in your life that you have to get done? Do you balance the two? Do you just ignore one of those two things, which is the most important, which is yourself? So when you spend all of that time giving, it can leave us feeling a little stretched thin and burned out. Therapy can give you the tools to find more balance in your life so you can keep supporting others without leaving yourself behind. If you're thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. No rushing around between work, lunch hours, after work to try to get to a session. You can do it online, do it as needed, and really take care of yourself in a much more convenient fashion. And it's more cost-effective than in-person therapy as well. So just fill out a brief questionnaire, get matched with a licensed therapist. If you don't really like the therapist and don't jive with the therapist you get matched to, it is super easy and completely free to switch therapists at any time. So find more balance with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Here we go, Matt. The Cincinnati Bengals in the 2023 NFL draft, and they kind of threw a lot of people for a loop. Everyone had them pegged to be taking a tight end in round one, and I just felt like it really fit. And in fact, they never ended up taking a tight end in the entire draft in this really good tight end class. They did take a couple of wide receivers late, maybe looking ahead to try to develop some cheap talent at that position, going back to our earlier conversation. But they ended up with Myles Murphy out of Clemson at the end of round one, which is, I think, a smoking deal for what he could become with all of his physical gifts at defensive end. And, we'll see if that develops for him. But his profile is someone that usually goes a lot earlier in an NFL draft.
No doubt. I was shocked he lasted that long. Real quick here, and this goes back to the salary cap stuff coming up for the Bengals, is they've built a really good roster. But if you notice, the offense was mostly homegrown guys, Burrow, Higgins, Mixon, Chase, Boyd, where they uncharacteristically spent a fair amount of money on defense to build this team. So now that's about to change, though. They're about to pay all the offense, so they're drafting the cheap defensive talent now as guys like Bates leave. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And we'll see what they don't have to do anything quite yet with
but
with
it's coming.
Higgins, obviously, but they've got to make some decisions, and it's going to be really hard and maybe impossible with paying Burrow to pay both Chase and Higgins. So they'll probably play that out as long as they can before they have to do something, which might be, a draft day trade, who knows, next year with Higgins involved, potentially. That's the way it would look to me. And I'm trying to think around the NFL, how many teams, like Rodgers and Devontae Adams were kind of there for a while. Like, what teams had just top of the market quarterback and top of the market wide receiver payouts at the same time? It's pretty rare.
Bills are close, but yeah, it's hard. I mean, for a while there, maybe a year or two, Kansas City did, but then they had to move on from Tyreek. But yeah, it's awful hard to pay both. I mean, you're 100% right. And other areas certainly will suffer. And I think it's the defense. That's why you make 3 picks right off the bat on defense. And Tyler Boyd's a fine player, but I'm sure he'll get caught up in the wash and won't be there much longer, especially if you're going to keep Higgins. That's who I think Charlie Jones is. I think he's your next Tyler Boyd. And I'm squinting a little bit, but the big, tall Princeton receiver, Iosifas,
Yosivas, I believe.
Nice. Well done.
Andre Yosivas out of Princeton. Yeah, he's a tooled up, tall, 6'3", fast wide receiver, former track guy. Let's see if he can, develop. He's pretty raw. I watched some of his tape.
Yeah, he is.
What he develops, but kind of a wild card 6th-round player. See what you get there with a super athletic guy.
Maybe he does some Higgins things for you, where Jones does some Boyd things for you. Is always going with those guys, maybe.
You got to squint a little bit, but
yeah.
Developmental receivers there in round 4 and round 6. Round 2, they went with another tooled up defender, Michigan cornerback DJ Turner. They drafted Alabama safety Jordan Battle in round 3. They drafted a running back in between Charlie Jones and Andre Yosivas, those 2 wide receivers. In the 5th round, Chase Brown, a player I liked, running back out of Illinois. And then Brad Robbins, Michigan punter in round 6, and DJ Ivey, Miami cornerback in round 7.
So Brown has a very clear path to playing time. I thought Mixon played quite poorly. He's getting expensive. P. Ryan's gone. So Brown steps right in as number 2. And we know how that works in this league. I mean, he might be the starter in week 4. Who knows?
I was actually somewhat surprised that Mixon made it through this offseason.
Me too.
And he hasn't completely made it through the offseason yet. We're still in the offseason technically. But getting through the draft on a roster is a pretty important deal. So it looks like he's going to spend another year. It might be his last year in Cincinnati. I don't know. So Chase Brown, interesting running back. And I want to talk to you more about Chase Brown when we talk dynasty, because
he's got some value.
Pick there, 5th-round selection, running back out of Illinois for those Cincinnati Bengals. What was your favorite pick?
I want to touch on these top 3 defensive players real quick. I mean, Battle makes all the sense in the world. They drafted Daxton Hill in the 1st round last year, and they lost both safeties this year. So perfect example of can't afford our guys. We're going to have to plug in a rookie. They always one spot they do draft high is corner. And that's, the case in point here again with Turner, who I like. He can play slot. He can play outside. And this team never really changes. They don't make any trades. They make their pick at 28. In the 2nd round, they make their pick. They don't do a whole lot. They don't get off course very much. And that's exactly what Murphy is. If you look at this team going back to like Carlos Dunlap, they want big 4'3" defensive ends that are 270 pounds. And Murphy fits that perfectly. And he's my favorite player of the group. I mean, I didn't think he should have fallen to 28 in any shape or form.
And we talked about this, I think it was last week, how, it was when we looked back at the 2021 draft and projected some of those 5th-round options coming up next offseason for those teams, and looking at the late round 1 edge players, and they all kind of whiffed on those guys because you're swinging on some measurables and you're hoping you can develop a guy. I think Myles Murphy as a prospect, for the Bengals to have sat back at 29 and get Myles Murphy, was a better prospect than almost all those names we talked about at the end of the 1st round in 2021.
Good point. 100% agree. And it makes you wonder, how much longer can we keep Hubbard and Hendrickson around? And, you can see how this is all turning into, I think they're a very transparent team.
Yeah. And it makes perfect sense. I love actually what they did. They got great value in round 1, a couple of wide receivers late to develop, and, might not play a lot or at all hardly in 2023, but you see what you get in the future there, and get some cheap receivers behind some of your stars. Chase Brown, like that pick in the 5th round. So a lot to like here. And then Jordan Battle, who was a sort of when I put on the Jordan Battle tape, Matt, it was sort of ho-hum, but it was like, well, that's literally the name of their the name of their job is in their position, right? Safety. It was just a safe kind of like,
safe.
He doesn't do anything spectacular, but you know what? he doesn't do anything wrong either. He's right where you need him to be on the back end of the defense. So I like that. Dax Hill and Jordan Battle long term, maybe at safety for them.
Yeah, I don't think it'll hurt you. I mean, it'll be fine. They're cheap. Keep them for a while.
So good draft. I like what they did. I think they hit on some pretty good value throughout most of it. I don't know that they'll get a lot of production from those later round wide receivers, but they're later round wide receivers for a reason. So we'll see. And I'll be drafting Chase Brown in a lot of my fantasy leagues.
Agreed. And I think those receivers are good dart throws for them because they might need one of them.
Next, we got the Cleveland Browns and the Pittsburgh Steelers. We are breaking down the 2023 NFL Draft for the AFC North. And I do want to thank everybody once again for making Peacock and Williamson your first listen every day here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Shout out to the everydayers and get those questions in for tomorrow's mailbag episode. Actually, Thursdays. We're doing Twitter Thursdays right now.
Yeah, there we go.
Thursday's mailbag episode. You can drop a question to us on Twitter at BD Peacock, at Williamson NFL, or in the YouTube comments as well. And make sure you're subscribed up and hit the notification and the like button on the new Peacock and Williamson YouTube channel as well. That always helps us out. And of course, we'll be continuing throughout the entire NFL, going division by division, team by team, breaking down the 2023 NFL drafts and taking a look ahead at the season for all those squads. Next up is the Cleveland Browns, Matt, who are building now behind their first full real year of their first real franchise quarterback since Bernie Kosar, practically. It feels
really.
like. And so we'll see what it looks like with Deshaun Watson in the Cleveland Browns. And they went with a receiving weapon for him with their first selection, which wasn't until the third round. Cedric Tillman, a big 6'3", 6'4" wide receiver out of Tennessee. One of the ways he was described that I thought was funny was that he basically commits offensive pass interference on the better half of his routes that he runs, but it doesn't get called. So it's like, it's fine. And that's the kind of guy you're getting, kind of a taller wide receiver, wins at the catch point, 6'3", 213 pounds. I like the value in round 3 for Cedric Tillman out of Tennessee. Siaki Ika, big defensive tackle out of Baylor in round 3 as well. A couple of fourth rounders with DeJuan Jones, offensive tackle, who slid all the way down to Cleveland with the 9th pick in round 4 out of Ohio State. Isaiah McGuire, an edge rusher from Missouri in the 4th round, which is one of my favorite players in the entire draft. I love Dorian Thompson-Robinson in round 5, the quarterback from UCLA. So just fantastic value here in the middle rounds for a team that didn't have a first or second round. Cameron Mitchell, Northwestern corner in round 5, and then in round 6, Luke Whippler, center from Ohio State. I gave them an A for their draft because I thought they came away with a haul and future starters on this team for not having a first or second round.
Yeah, I mean, they didn't have a lot of cards in their hand, but I thought they played them extremely well. And obviously, I pay more attention to the Steelers' opponents, the AFC North, but I think this is a pretty transparent draft as well. I mean, Matthew Berry reported at the Combine, hey, don't expect this to be a running back-centric, offense anymore. They're going to be in shotgun. They're going to cater to Watson, 3 wide. Well, you trade for Elijah Moore and you draft Cedric Tillman. It sure looks like, much like the Ravens, they're going to start using the receivers more. They've really boosted that room tremendously. And again, don't forget, they're minus $51 million a year from now. Is Amari Cooper going to still be able to survive? Is Jack Conklin still going to survive at right tackle, which leads me to DeWad Jones. Maybe he's your right tackle a year from now. Picking up Whippler is maybe a DeWad Jones, keep him on the straight and narrow, but he's also great value that late. If you're going to have $70 million invested in your quarterback, well, you want Dorian Thompson-Robinson, who has some similarities, to be the backup on the cheap on a rookie deal as a 5th rounder. So all this stuff adds up. And, I talked about position groups. I thought the Browns' defensive tackles last year might have been the worst defensive tackles in the whole league. So they went out and signed Tomlinson to big money, and then Ika, both of whom are space eaters plus. They're obviously a style of defensive tackle, and all their linebackers are smaller run and hit guys. I'm surprised they didn't add a linebacker, but they helped them by protecting them a little bit.
I love that.
Yeah.
Tomlinson, Ika, let's get 500 pounds. No, wait, 700.
Way more. Yeah, right.
Of 500. 700 pounds of defensive tackle in there to eat up blocks and let Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah and Anthony Walker and Jacob Phillips was their third rounder 2 drafts ago. Let those guys run around and roam free. And Juan Thornhill, who they signed in free agency to play free safety. They got Grant Delpit, who was a second rounder a couple of years ago. And so and still have those first rounders at corner. Denzel Ward, who got paid. Greg Newsome doesn't look like they're going to pay, and then obviously Myles Garrett there as well. So really strengthened some important pieces on that team, and then gave their quarterback Deshaun Watson some more weapons in the draft, and hit a lot of value. And to be honest with you, man, I think by the end of this year, Isaiah McGuire, 4th round pick, he's gonna be the starting defensive end across from Myles Garrett, and he's gonna be good. So I love this draft. McGuire was my favorite pick, and they had a lot of picks to really like. So great job, Cleveland Browns.
Yeah, and another weakness last year was kind of Myles Garrett and the Pips up front, and now they get a Okonkwo, the edge guy from Houston, who I liked quite a bit, came on strong last year, and McGuire. So those two should complement Garrett very, very well. I mean, they turned a weakness into a strength, in my opinion, and they've been miscasting Newsome as the nickel slot corner. I think Mitchell will project to that one, and I guess they're like best friends too. So, great,
Oh, there you go. All right,
yeah,
nice little story.
Yeah, how about that?
How about those? So I really gave the Browns and the Steelers 2 of my highest grades when we went through this, and we were talking about drafts that we liked. And so a lot of good things to say about the Cleveland Browns draft. And Matt, a lot of good things to say about your Pittsburgh Steelers draft, starting with trading up and getting Broderick Jones, who looks to be the long-term franchise left tackle for this team. Is he going straight into left tackle? Is he going to play right side? Is he going to play guard? What's the plan here with Broderick Jones?
The plan is, he is very raw in protection and has some bad habits, but he's unusually young. And I've been telling Steeler fans this. I'm like, if he doesn't start week 1, it doesn't mean this guy stinks. Offensive linemen can't have obvious holes in their game because they play every snap. You can put edge pass rushers out there situationally. Jalen Hyatt isn't a developed route runner, but I can throw him out there week 1 and run goes. You can't do that with offensive linemen. If they have something big they need to work on, they play every snap. You can't do that.
Would be, how come nobody's ever tried that?
It's crazy, isn't it? Yeah.
2 down offensive tackle, and then your 3rd down offensive tackle.
Kick him in as he's a pass protection expert.
Yeah.
But can't move
everyone
anybody.
knows what you're doing,
and everyone knows
it anyway.
Yeah. So he's a moldable piece of clay that will be the left tackle maybe as soon as camp opens. Everyone looks at him and says, boy, he's a lot better than Dan Moore. But he has some work to do technique-wise. It doesn't have a lot of experience, but immensely talented. I'll be honest, BP, usually I'm harder on the Steelers draft. I don't feel the same way with the Niners, but I'm harder on the Steelers draft than the other 31 teams. And when I previewed this draft 3 days a week for the last 4 months, I often said things like, I'd take Joey Porter. I said things like this. Boy, they got no shot at Broderick Jones. I'd take Porter at 17, where their original pick was. I'd take Benton at 32. I'd take Washington at 32. I wouldn't mind getting Nick Herbig at 93. Well, they got all those guys the pick after that, almost a whole round later. I don't know if fate was on their side or whatever, but everything just seemed to fall into their lap perfectly.
Yeah, and obviously big athletic cornerbacks in this draft. Joey Porter fell to them with the first pick in round 2. Like that trade, too, now that we've seen the final results of the Claypool trade to get that pick from the Chicago Bears. Cornerback out of Penn State and the son of a Steeler great, Joey Porter there at pick 32. And then he came back in the 7th round with Corey Trice, who's 6'3", super athletic. And I did hear some more from Jim Nagy, who does the Senior Bowl, and he said that he didn't invite Trice to the Senior Bowl because teams said that he was going to be red flagged and thought he might fall out of the draft because of it, because of his knee, because of that ACL he had in 2021. So
that's the thing, though, is it was 2 years ago, and then he had a great year and a great combine. So I'm sure there's structural damage, but I mean, he's not that much different than Porter, in my opinion.
I mean, if he's good for 4 years, I would take that in a heartbeat in the 7th round over a guy. There are players that are worse corners that were drafted earlier. It's like, well, I don't want a bad corner in the 4th round because he's got good knees. You know what I mean?
Right. You can't cover anybody. Right.
We'll see what that ends up looking like. But I mean, I love the value there all the way into the 7th round. It's crazy. And then guard Spencer Anderson out of Maryland. I didn't watch him much, so you can talk about him. But
versatile, probably going to be a center.
Okay, athletic so interior offensive lineman out out of Maryland there in round 7. You mentioned Nick Herbig, who's a weird player because he's kind of an outside linebacker, but he's good rushing the passer, but he's not built like a rusher. So I don't know exactly how you use him, which is probably why he's there still in the 4th round. Washington, we know, fell because maybe some character, maybe some injury problems as well. And I love the Keanu Benton starting defensive tackle, kind of maybe even some shades of Javon Hargrave there from an ex-Steeler with Keanu Benton in round 2.
So the Steeler nepotism has gone overboard. I mean, it's a little ridiculous. I mean, last year they walk honestly 10 feet away to grab Kenny Pickett out of the same building. And then they draft Cam Hayward's son or brother. This year, they take Porter's son. They take 2 Georgia guys. They take 2 Wisconsin guys. Herbig works out with the Watts. Oh, by the way, they signed Nate Herbig a month ago. So they bring another brother into the mix. Like the nepotism and the knowledge of some of these guys is remarkable in terms of everybody's brothers or sons or cousins or buddies or whatever. But I mean, that familiarity to me is a good thing. You know, if I know more about Porter than I do, you know, the other corner I'm not sure about, take the guy you know more information about. So Benton to me will be their Tyson Alualu, which is a modern day nose. You know, they don't want Casey Hamptons anymore, but he'll be, quote, a nose, but he'll be out there in 4-man fronts a lot. Washington's going to be the big blocking tight end. And in the second half of the season, after the Claypool trade, they went to much heavier personnel, running the football. So Washington, to me, is just a big upgrade over Zach Gentry, who got a big spike in snap count. And you mentioned Herbig. I mean, really good college player, undersized, but he's going to start out as Highsmith and Watts backup. But there certainly is a contingency plan that he could move off the ball. You know, like they've had Chad Brown and Lawrence Timmons and guys that have done both in their 3-4.
I absolutely could see that. And when you see Nick Herbig, you're kind of like, probably a Steeler-y kind of a player. And it's not that 90s Steelers defense anymore, but they're still the closest in the league to running that old, 3-4 stand-up rusher type of idea. Mm-hmm. So I like that pick there in the late 4th round, Nick Herbig out of Wisconsin, see what they get out of him. Did you get any more information from Darnell Washington and his fall? Because there was talk of maybe character, maybe injury, maybe some combination.
Knees.
So it's a knee thing. Okay.
It's mostly a knee thing. I think he's got an odd upbringing. I don't think that he's like a bad guy or anything, but I think he's a little different, but I think it's knees. And I can't get any real reading on how bad it is. I mean, I just heard occasional swelling, but he plays through it. He didn't miss time. I think a big thing that hurt him was if you're torn between him and Schoonmaker, well, maybe he just doesn't win any of the ties against Kraft or Musgrave because of the knees. And then he falls to 93. And how many tight ends are going to get drafted in the top 2 rounds anyway? That's how many teams are after that position. But another article I wrote, BP, that is very obvious to me, all their additions, I mean, all these guards they've brought in, Patrick Peterson, this entire draft, they're all huge for their position. I mean, Trice, Porter, Benton, Jones. I've seen Jones, Porter, and Washington in person. They're all unbelievably physically impressive, even by NFL standards. Herbig's like the only one that isn't too big to ride almost.
And putting 2 and 2 together, Matt, sounds like they're going to protect their young quarterback. He's not a rookie anymore, but they're probably not going to put everything on his shoulders, and they're going to try to be physical and run the heck out of the ball and give him some 3rd and shorts.
Yeah, and even trading for Allen Robinson, he's a very good blocker. I mean, like, everyone's physical, everyone can block, and they found an identity in the second half of the season. I mean, it didn't jump off the page at you, but if you do things like EPA from week 9 on, their bye was in week 9. They played about equal amount of games before the bye and after, give by 1 game difference. They played the hardest schedule in the league before the bye with a rookie quarterback, and Watt had just gotten hurt, and they were a disaster. After the bye, they traded Claypool, and they got big and physical, and they were actually one of the best offenses EPA-wise the second half of the season, and the defense was solid. Watt started to come back. The defense is always solid. So they kind of found a formula. They just need to really create more explosive plays, though, off of it. The Chiefs and the Steelers were the 2 teams that had the most 10 plus play drives. And the Chiefs could do it because Mahomes just nickel and dimes you to death, takes what, and everyone was afraid of the deep ball, where the Steelers had to do it.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you have a favorite pick? I'm going to go with Broderick Jones because I just like the draft game that they played and moving up a couple spots to really get a guy that might not have gotten there to them and to get one of the true blue chippers in this draft. And really with Broderick Jones, he doesn't have that much to work on. If he fixes those couple of things, and we might see it in his rookie year where it's like, oh my gosh, this guy's too physically gifted. He's going to be one of the better tackles in the NFL. Like he's got that much talent.
So I'm going on my Steeler tangents here, but I guess it's a good enough forum to do it. That's the first offensive tackle they've drafted in the first round since Jermaine Stevens in 1996. And part of the reason is because they've been too good. You know, like if you're picking 25, you don't get franchise left tackles. So you take one in the third round and say, Ben, deal with it. You know what I mean? So
and they've been so good at developing
right
pipeline of offensive linemen. They've always had really good offensive linemen and developed these really good players for as long as I can remember.
Yeah, especially when Munchak was there. I mean, he was really, really good at it. So I think they looked at this like we could actually get a true franchise left tackle that might even go to a Pro Bowl. You know, like even in Steeler history, like I could, if I put out my best Steeler team, who's the best receiver? Antonio Brown or Stallworth? You know, who are my corners? Woodson and Blunt, you know, Palomar. I mean, like it's Hall of Famers everywhere. Not really a tackle. You know what I mean? They just haven't had the opportunity to draft Jonathan Ogden.
They've been too good.
They've been too good. Right. They go too quick.
Fantastic stuff. That is the AFC North. Let us know what you think about your team's favorite draft. And of course, we will get to those teams that we haven't yet as we continue looking around the league, division by division, team by team at the 2023 draft and how those teams were built for this season. Thanks, everybody, for making us your first listen. Matt and I back tomorrow. Get those questions in for Twitter Thursday this week right here. Peacock and Williamson